Today I wanted to talk about identity versus self. People talk a lot about a sense of identity, and apparently it's a very important thing. So when I was a teenager, in my late teens, and as teenagers go, I was a bit troubled, more inside than outside. But I went to see an homeopath. It was an homeopath. He did all sort of, strange things, like biofeedback and things like that. And he said that my main problem was that I would not identify. So I would not, coming out of teenagehood, coming out of childhood, going into adulthood. And the idea is that I was supposed to take on a role, and my reluctance to actually take on that role was at the source, in his opinion, of my problems. And that brought me to think a lot about identity. And I've been thinking about it since, pretty much. But the main thing, my main reaction then was like, how can I identify in a role when my role model, well, the models that are offered to me are just not acceptable in my view. So that's the first thing, is that thing about having to fit into some kind of mold when I can feel that the mold is not right. So yeah, of course I refuse to do so, and therefore I become a trouble because I would not fit into specific things. And then I was only later on that I was reading a book by Anthony de Mello when he actually said the opposite. He was talking about how identity it can be a cage. And that was exactly my thing. So what do we mean by identity? Well, it's just a set of labels, isn't it? I am a certain gender, a certain age, a certain social kind of like class, a certain nationality, religion. So, it's just all these kind of little labels that I put in front of myself to present an image to the world. And it's fine, we might need to present an image to the world. Camille Paglia says that identity is power. And I can see how in a market environment, where everything is a product, a strong identity for a product, it's very useful. Now, look at me. I just wore a blue wig. Because that gives a certain kind of like character. It can be identified into something. But that's not necessarily identity. I mean, my identity doesn't depend on my blue wig. And I think this is where the problem becomes an issue. That is, when I confuse who I am with the labels that are given to me. So, I'm not my identity card. I'm not anything that is presented to me. I'm not any of the things that I'm supposed to be. I might be defined by them in certain contexts, but I certainly do not define myself through those. And so that's where we go into the idea of self. And now what is self? Self is just is. Self is. It's like, who I am, and I am. That's it. And this is, to me, self is being. And who is being? Well, as God said to Moses, I am the one who is, I think. It's the isn't it? It's just sheer being. And we all are just being. Anything that any other label or idea that is attached to us is actually not reflecting who we are at core. But it's just a kind of like role we take on in a game. So if I take on a role in a game, and I know that I'm doing that, I can leave that role anytime I want to leave the game. But if I think that I am the role in the game, then it becomes problematic. Also because I think we are incredibly complex, and so the moment I experience something that goes against the definition of the role in the game, then I have an inner conflict, because all of a sudden I don't know who I am anymore. And that is just because I had pushed my sense of identity into a little label, which has nothing to do with who I am at core. So that to me was the essential resolution of the issue. And that is like the moment we connect with self rather than with a sense of identity, then all of a sudden we experience this incredible freedom, because we can be anything. And we are anything that we want to be. Perhaps we cannot quite express that role when we interact in a social game because of the constrictions of the game. But there's no getting away from the fact that the moment I identify with my sense of self, so I'm connected with the sense of self, and the sense of self is nothing but the experience of being, the sensation of being before any other definition, then I can be anything, and I'm actually in a position when I can integrate conflicting ideas about who I am or I should be. There are so many, there are of course many consequences and layers that come into this, let's call it, well, realization. It's a bit of a big word, isn't it? But the moment I accept, and the moment I experience that who I am is just this bubble of energy, just a being made of energy, which we are. Because, you can say whatever you like, but at the core, you cannot deny that that's what we are. And if we can align to that idea, and then we don't need to define ourselves in other ways in order to experience a sense of being. So that's, to me, is what a sense of self is. Just experiencing myself being. Now, I know by personal experience that sometimes we can be very dissociated by that, because we get lost in the game. We get lost in this idea of who I am and who I'm supposed to be, and I'm that. This is the split to me that happens as children, because children, they just know they are, there's not getting away. But at the same time, a child asks constantly, who am I? Because they see that, around them, they want to put themselves within the context. They want a sense of themselves. I know my niece, for example, always wanted to repeat the same story, which is a story about how her dad and her mum met. And it's still something I sort of like, I find fascinating, but at the same time, it's sort of like wonder, why do we need a sense of history? It's just because, maybe it gives a sense of power. So the child constructs a sense of identity for himself. And I wonder whether it's because he's not completely accepted, and however much we would have accepted my niece, there's still a social setup, and children are incredibly sensitive to what is not said, to the non-said, to the energies that underline the interactions. So that so they would naturally try to fit in some, and therefore try to get some sense of identity for themselves. But I still think that cultivating instead a sense of self, which implies acceptance of whatever you do and whatever you are. It's just like, you accept somebody as a being. And of course then, we have interaction, and there are social rules. Yes, you don't go around killing people. It's not nice. Of course, there are limitations, but that's a completely different and huge subject. The core, the idea that self, a sense of connecting with being at the core, to me is, and somehow eliminates any kind of conflicts that arise from identifying with something that is outside ourselves, whether it's a definition in terms of gender, age, tribes, football. I don't know. There are people that are killed because of a football match, and to me it's because their sense of being is so connected with the sense of identity in constructed within this idea that they are a supporter of this team, that they actually feel threatened at the core when they lose a match. You know, their sense of being, it's really threatened. And I mean, it's very difficult to threaten a sense of self, in my view. You know, you just kind of like, you cannot be, then that's it. You know, you either kill me or you don't kill me. But, you know, at the core, you just cannot deny my sense of self. But you can play power game with identity. I don't think you can play power game with self. So I think that to focus on self rather than identity might be a very useful exercise. And just imagine, you know, then you would have lots of people going around being satisfied with themselves and not having to kill somebody because they pray to a different god or anything like that, or because their football team has lost, or because their nation is threatened, or whatever, or because they need to prove something. There are many connotations about the dissociation from a sense of self projected into identity, that are very much at the core of the mess we're in, I would say. Yeah, so how do you strengthen the connection with a sense of self? It's by disidentifying with your sense of identity and reconnecting with a sense of self. And of course, meditation helps a lot with that, but it's not enough. Meditation usually, you know, meditation is a tool like everything else. Meditation, it's as effective as it is used and as the context in which it is used. So I think it's enough for now, and we're going to talk about disidentification perhaps next time. Have a lovely day.